Good morning, everybody. All zero of you watching at the moment that I'm doing this, which is a first, unfortunately. Going to have to take a couple minutes here because I thought I uploaded this document that I have for you, but today we're going to talk about the translation of Francis's text. Got to wait till the video actually processes that I have for you because I have pre-recorded the whole thing. I actually am the only one who has an English language translation of the text. And for your edification, this document is going to be available on my sources blog at returntotradition.org here in a little bit. Once today's actual video goes live, I'll include it with the text for that, because today's video, the main video, is a sort of an analysis of what it's going to do. One of the effects, anyway. This thing's going to have a lot of consequences for the church in general. Good morning to Catholic Cowboys and Yellow Roses. Yeah, not zero anymore. It was weird. For the first time ever, it was at zero. But, that's what happens. And as more people join the chat, I welcome you. And again, we're going to talk about Francis's new document. I, this morning, took the time to use the best web translating service I could and translated it into an unofficial translation into English. It was only published in Italian. I don't think I'm the only one to have done that, but I will have the text available at returntotradition.org at about 5 a.m. Central Standard Time. That is in about 40 minutes. We have today at 5 a.m. the video discussing the implications of this document, what it's going to do, and it's an important thing because two documents were released by Francis at the same time, basically. The first is Laudate Deum, which was released like a day or two before the beginning of the Synod of Sin. That was released on the feast of St. Francis of Assisi. Is essentially Laudato Si 2, a document, not something no one asked for, but yet he released it. And then right afterwards, he issued this document, which bears the name that totally rolls easily off the tongue, Ad Theologiam Provendam, which is, at least it's got a Latin title. It's actually relatively short. The document that I have with my recording of it that I'll play here once it's done processing by StreamYards is 9 minutes long, which is pretty short for him. That's actually incredibly short. A couple takeaways. He basically quotes himself and the Bible a little bit, mostly himself. The second takeaway from this is it is clearly putting the theology of the church, the actual institutions for studying theology, at the service of the world. This is either explicitly telling them to reinterpret the gospel in light of science and things. I shouldn't have to tell you how dangerous that is, especially since one of the hallmarks of science and the scientific process is that there's nothing is static. There are very few laws of science for a reason. Science is a very self-reflective process. It requires the scientists to do their studies with a certain amount of actual rules and strictures and oversight. They publish their study findings. They submit them to their peers for peer review, and then others take and try to duplicate their processes and point out the flaws in their thinking. And it's a never-ending process. And so it's very curious, and now we are being told the theologians of the church are going to have to submit themselves to the scrutinies of the scientific community. It's incredible, really. The thinking about this is bizarre, but I'm not surprised because, as Botsing told us, he started using a term called the world church in an interview recently. And as some of you pointed out in the comments of yesterday's video, that is a very revealing statement. Perhaps that's what they're talking about with the ape of the church. Not all Latin stuff is good. Obviously not, Good morning to you in Australia. Good morning to you in Florida. Good morning, Miriam. God bless you as well. Let's get to the actual text. This is a translation, the only English translation that I know exists. It will be available on my website here in about 40 minutes or so. So here's the translation of Francis's text, putting the theologians of the church basically on notice that they have to put things in the context of science now, which is not good.
Apostolic letter in the form of a motu proprio of the Supreme Pontiff Francis, Ad Theologiam Provendam, with which are approved new statutes of the Pontifical Academy of Theology. Promoting theology in the future cannot be limited to abstractly reproposing formulas and schemes of the past. Called to prophetically interpret the present and glimpse new itineraries for the future in the light of revelation, theology will have to confront profound cultural transformations, aware that we are living through is not simply an era of change but a change of epoch. The Pontifical Academy of Theology, which arose in the early 18th century under the auspices of Clement XI, my predecessor, and was canonically established by him with the brief Inscrutabile on April 23, 1718, throughout its centuries-long existence, has constantly embodied the need to place theology at the service of the Church and the world, modifying when necessary its structure and expanding its aims. From an initial place of theological formation of clergymen in a context where other institutions were lacking and inadequate for that purpose, to a group of scholars called upon to investigate and deepen theological themes of particular relevance. The updating of the statutes, desired by my predecessors, marked and promoted this process. Think of the statutes approved by Gregory XVI on August 26, 1838, and those approved by St. John Paul II on the Apostolic Letter Inter Munera Academarium on January 28, 1999. After almost 5 years, the time has come to revise these norms, to make them more suitable for the mission that our time imposes on theology. A synodal, missionary, and outgoing church can only be matched by an outgoing theology. As I wrote in my letter to the Grand Chancellor of the Catholic University of Argentina, addressing professors and students of theology, do not settle for a desk theology. Let your place of reflection be the frontiers. Good theologians, like good pastors, also smell of the people and the street, and by their reflection pour oil and wine on the wounds of men. Openness to the world, to man in the concreteness of his existential situation, with its problems, wounds, challenges, and potential, cannot, however, be reduced to a tactical attitude, intrinsically adapting now crystallized content to new situations, but must urge theology to an epistemological and methodological rethinking, as indicated in the proem of the Apostolic Constitution Veritatis Gaudium. Theological reflection is therefore called to a turning point, to a paradigm shift, to a courageous cultural revolution that commits it first and foremost to be a fundamentally contextual theology, capable of reading and interpreting the gospel in the conditions in which men and women daily live, in different geopolitical, social, and cultural environments, and having as its archetype the incarnation of the eternal Logos, its entering into the culture, worldview, and religious tradition of a people. From here, theology cannot but develop into a culture of dialogue and encounter between different traditions and different knowledge, between different Christian denominations and different religions, openly confronting everyone, believers and non-believers alike. Indeed, the need for dialogue is intrinsic to human beings and to the whole of creation, and it is the particular task of theology to discover the Trinitarian imprint that makes the cosmos in which we live a web of relationships, in which it is proper to every living being to tend toward another thing. This relational dimension connotes and defines, from the epistemic point of view, the status of theology, which is urged not to close itself in self-referentiality, which leads to isolation and insignificance, but to grasp itself as embedded in a web of relationships, first and foremost, with other disciplines and other knowledge. This is the approach of cross-disciplinarity, that is, interdisciplinarity in a strong sense, as distinct from multidisciplinarity, understood as interdisciplinarity in a weak sense. The latter certainly promotes a better understanding of the object of study by considering it from multiple points of view, which nevertheless remain complementary and separate. Instead, cross-disciplinarity should be thought of as, quote, the placement and fermentation of all knowledge within the space of light and life offered by the wisdom that emanates from God's revelation. Hence the arduous task for theology to be able to make use of new categories elaborated by other knowledges, in order to penetrate and communicate the truths of faith and transmit the teaching of Jesus in today's language with originality and critical awareness. Dialogue with other knowledge evidently presupposes dialogue with the ecclesial community and an awareness of the essential synodal and communal dimension of doing theology. The theologian cannot but live fraternity and communion in the first person, at the service of evangelization, and in order to reach the hearts of all. As I said to theologians in the address to the members of the International Theological Commission, November 24, 2022, Ecclesial synodality therefore commits theologians to do theology in a synodal form, promoting among themselves the capacity to listen, dialogue, and discern, and integrate the multiplicity and variety of instances and inputs. It is therefore important that there are places, including institutional ones, in which to live and experience theological collegiality and fraternity. Finally, the necessary attention to the scientific status of theology should not obscure its sapiential dimension, as already clearly stated by St. Thomas Aquinas. Therefore, Blessed Antonio Rosmini considered theology a sublime expression of intellectual charity, while calling for the critical reason of all knowledge to be oriented to the idea of wisdom. Now, the idea of wisdom inwardly holds truth and charity together in a solid circle, so that it is impossible to know truth without practicing charity, because the one is in the other, and neither of the two is found outside the other. Hence, he who has this truth has charity with it that fulfills it, and he who has this charity has truth fulfilled. Scientific reason must expand its boundaries in the direction of wisdom, lest it dehumanize and impoverish itself. By this route, theology can contribute to the current debate of rethinking thinking, showing itself to be a true critical knowledge insofar as it is sapiential knowledge, not abstract and ideological, but spiritual, elaborated on its knees, pregnant with adoration and prayer, a transcendent knowledge, and, at the same time, attentive to the voice of the people. Thus, popular theology, mercifully addressed to the open wounds of humanity and creation within the folds of human history, to which it prophesies the hope of ultimate fulfillment. It is a matter of the pastoral stamp that theology as a whole, and not only in one of its particular spheres, must assume, without opposing theory and practice. Theological reflection is urged to develop with an inductive method, which starts from the different contexts and concrete situations in which peoples are inserted, allowing itself to be seriously challenged by reality, in order to become discernment of the signs of the times, in the proclamation of the salvific event of the God agape, communicated in Jesus Christ. Therefore, it is necessary that the knowledge of people's common sense, which is in fact a theological place in which so many images of God dwell, often not corresponding to the Christian face of God, only and always love, be privileged first of all. Theology is at the service of the Church's evangelization and transmission of faith, so that faith becomes culture, that is, the wise ethos of God's people, a proposal of human and humanizing beauty for all. Faced with this renewed mission of theology, the Pontifical Academy of Theology is called to develop, in its constant attention to the scientific nature of theological reflection, cross-disciplinary dialogue with other scientific, philosophical, humanistic, and artistic knowledge, with believers and non-believers, with men and women of different Christian denominations and different religions. This will be able to happen by creating an academic community of shared faith and study that weaves a network of relationships with other formative, educational, and cultural institutions, and is able to penetrate with originality and a spirit of imagination into the existential places of the elaboration of knowledge, professions, and Christian communities. Thanks to the new statutes, the Pontifical Academy of Theology will thus be able more easily to pursue the goals that the present times require. Accepting favorably the vows that have been addressed to me to approve these new norms and indulging them, I desire that this egregious seat of study may grow in quality, and therefore I approve, by virtue of this apostolic letter, and in perpetuity, the statutes of the Pontifical Academy of Theology, legitimately drawn up and newly revised, and I confer upon them the force of apostolic approval. All that I have decreed in this apostolic letter, motu proprio given, I order to have stable and lasting force, notwithstanding anything to the contrary. Given at Rome, at St. Peter's, on the 1st day of November in the year 2023, Solemnity of All Saints, the 11th of the Pontificate, signed, Francis.
Word salad. That term, I think, does apply to this very well. One of the things that we should take away from this document is, again, that this is explicitly calling for cross-disciplinary things that are kind of laughable. If you have any experience working in the social sciences like I do, then you understand that the idea that you're going to take and have the theologians try to work with social scientists and natural scientists and have any luck with them, given the state of the scientific fields, and right now, it's laughable. It's not going to happen. The idea that you're going to have like a gospel-infused social science is on its face ridiculous, at least at the current state of things. You need to have the spread of the gospel. You need to convert society and then have things trickle upwards from there. That's the only way that happens. But the core of this, the idea that we have to put things in the cultural context, the gospel message in the cultural context is odd, because the gospel is one of those, the gospel message, it's divinely inspired by the simple fact that without having to do more than translate the gospel into a local language, the effect it has on people. The message is universal by itself. It should be, because it is the saving message of our blessed Lord, who came to offer salvation to all men who cooperate with his will, who open themselves up to his grace. It doesn't need to be put into cultural context, except maybe in the giving people as an example in their own culture of what certain passages might mean without changing the context of them as examples, right? So you have a village life, that you have life in the village where you're reading them the gospel in their language, and you say, okay, so for example, say in the X, Y, and Z. But that's not what they're talking about here. They're talking about when they're talking about theology, they're talking about the actual real nuts and bolts of what this means to live this in a daily life. And that's really kind of enlightening, if you want to call it that, in the context of the Synod of Sin. We have seen the Synod of Sin, its end of this phase document, calling for questioning everything, basically, on the moral questions. This is a moral relativism document on steroids, basically. How does one put 2 + 2 = 4 into a cultural context? That's the nice thing about the gospel. It is that simple. It really is. Yes, there are certain things that Christians get divided over in terms, like, we'll tell them the Orthodox leaning Christians tend to get divided over in terms of moral questions and theological things such as the Eucharist and a few other things, but that's not usually what we're talking about here. Not the Synod of Sin isn't calling into question belief in the real presence. They're calling into question a lot of the day-to-day nuts and bolts things, and that's what you're going to see here, because the social sciences will tell you that the James Martin issue is intrinsically normal to the human condition. That's in our DNA. That's what they'll tell you. They don't provide any real proof of that, but that's what they tell you. And theologians are now being told to work with the people who say these silly, bizarre things that don't stand up to scrutiny. So I'm curious what you all thought of that text. I will have that text in full available on returntotradition.org in today's show notes with a link to this live stream there, along with the actual, it'll be in the same post as today's news video, which goes live here very shortly. Samantha says, the only thing we need in this chaotic mess is our full trust in our Lord, not anything that the Pope or the Synod try to feed us. We have 2,000 years of magisterial teachings to lean on in times of chaos like this. And that's why I bring these educational videos on the weekends that a lot of people don't bother with, that tell you, that show these are what the church always taught. This is what popes sounded like before the modern era. That's why I suggest people actually tune into them, especially when we go into penitential seasons like Lent and Advent and some other times of the year. Maybe you're reducing the amount of social media you consume during those times. Totally understandable. I recommend those kinds of videos for you, either done by myself or from other people. Sensus Fidelium, that's all they do over there. That's the kind of stuff people should imbibe, I think, to help get you through the chaos we're going through now, as well as, of course, familiarizing yourself with the errors that we're seeing pushed on us. As I'll say in a video that I'm working on right now for Monday or Tuesday, they are pushing something called the World Church. I think the Synodal Church and the World Church are interchangeable terms, but Bishop Botzing is the one who started with the World Church nonsense. And I suspect you're going to start seeing that language used more. The man is incredibly influential for someone who's not even an archbishop, but he is the president of the German Bishops' Conference, and he was the one running the German Synodal Way. At least he was a president of the German Bishops' Conference. I don't know if he still is or not, but that's what we're dealing with, folks. Something new. These are reforms that they're doing. Reforms. Be wary of people in the church who want to push reforms, whose reforms look like absolute changes to things that don't have root in Catholic history, who don't tell you to do penance, whose idea of reforms don't start with the reform of the individual believer, starting with themselves and other prelates, and of course the laity, through going to confession, receiving the Eucharist validly, getting on their knees and praying before the sacrament, any other way you can think of doing penance. If reforms don't start there, then reforms are a problem because they're not rooted in the faith. Well, DM, I can't read that comment because of that 3-letter acronym you use there, but I think you're correct. I think that's actually the real point of this. That's where we are. Any final thoughts on this? Suzanne offers the provocative thought of pray for the Pope to convert to Catholicism. Yeah, there's I'm sure we'll see later in the comments, a lot of people will have some things to say about that. It's a controversial statement to make for obvious reasons. Cindy C is going to Mass and Adoration this morning. Good. Make sure to tune into the regular news video I have going live in about 20 minutes. It will cover this document in more details, including some of the implications for it that I'm saving for there. Any other final thoughts? Otherwise, I'm going to close this out, as there will be a video going live very shortly that I think will be very useful for this discussion message in general. But for now, I'm suggesting that people continue to pray. And remember, it's Friday. This is a good day for acts of penance and things. And it's actually First Friday. So if you have the ability to go to a First Friday Mass and start that devotion, please do so. This is a wonderful time to do it. If you start it now, you'll finish sometime next summer. Anyway, folks, thanks very much for tuning in. As always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.